Hi friends, and welcome to another episode of Procreate Basics. Today we are going to get into how to outline a tattoo design for a stencil. Now, I do a lot of very complicated things because I do a lot of large scale work, sleeves, back pieces, things like that. So I will go over some of the strategies that I use in order to quickly and easily scale up my designs to prepare them for large scale printing. But this is also going to be a tutorial that is really for any tattoo artist who's looking for the fastest, best way to make a tattoo stencil in Procreate. Now, I just want to point out that there are a few tricks out there in the world that are mostly useful for realism artists. We are not going to go into that today, although I think it would be great for another video. Today's tutorial is going to be about actually hand drawing our stencil. And so we are going to go over how you can lock in the sizes of your liners so you have a consistent liner that you can go back to and have the exact same size each and every time. We're going to go into streamline settings and how to smooth out your line work to make the whole process of outlining cleanly a little bit easier. We'll also cover some specialized noise brushes that I use in order to put in sort of a halftone effect that can be representing a shaded area or a solid black area in your stencil. So if that sounds interesting to you, stick around for this video. We're going to jump into it right now. So here we are with a body map. So what this is the contact film. It's Contact brand makes it, and it comes in a roll. It's kind of a sticky film. You can see through it. It's transparent. It sticks to the skin. So I will actually draw directly onto contact film that's been pasted onto my client's body. So you peel the backing layer off and you stick this film onto their body, wrap it around, and kind of make all the cuts that you need to make it fit really well. In this case, it was an arm sleeve. And I've drawn with Sharpie marker on top of the contact film and then unwrapped it, put it back on its paper backer, and taped it up to a wall. So when this photo was taken, I've got this full arm sized body map, and there's also a little ruler that I taped onto the wall around it, just a paper ruler that I had at the time. And this is helpful because I can actually see what the scale of this design is, and I know that just counting up these 1-inch segments, that this is roughly 12 inches wide. And that can help me when I'm scaling it up at the end before printing the stencil. So starting with this, I will just bring this into a Procreate file, and I'll show you my layers here. Now there's a lot from this drawing. What I did here was I just did a quick levels adjustment to remove some of the grayscale kind of mess that was in that image, just to make it a little bit more clean where I could see it. And you can probably see here, you have a line that goes down the center of the top of the arm. This is the hand, so these are the knuckles. This is the elbow. This is the ditch or the bend. And then we have the front and the back armpit and sort of the center line, also the center line of the bicep. Just whatever marks I feel were helpful for me in sort of figuring out what the map of the sleeve would be. The next thing that I did was I did quite a bit of sketching over here on a model human's arm. And so this is actually sort of an end state that we eventually got to, but early in the process I just sketched really loosely just to get a feel for how I wanted the different shapes of these mushrooms and these wood pieces to interact with the arm. Once I was happy with that, I come over here and click on 3D and then 2D texture, and I get this flattened out view of it. Now you can export these straight from here and save them into your files gallery. So ultimately we end up with an export of my early sketch that just looks like this. So here's my early sketch that came directly off the 3D model human arm and was then imported into here. And from here I'm kind of doing a little bit of a comparison, lowering the opacity up and down, and I'm using warp here to move things around and make it fit the way that I want, because it's coming from that 3D model arm, which was similar in size to my client, but then I'm comparing it to this body map and making sure that the actual design is fitting on the map the way I want it to. So once I get it to that point, now I'm ready to start getting into the line drawing, which is what we're here to talk about today. So let's get into the process of actually creating a line drawing. Now, one of the first things that I will typically do is just add a new layer and select white and just fill the entire canvas with white. And this is just to make a layer of like tracing paper. So I'm not going to use pure white here, but I'll tap on that layer with 2 fingers and then slide my finger to the left to lower the opacity down until I can see through it, but I have an easier time kind of seeing the different parts that I want to outline. So now we need to make sure we do our outlines on their own layer. So tap the plus sign again, create a new layer, and name it Lines. Select black. I'm always using these color palettes, which, by the way, good time to mention that we are giving away these color palettes, which include these 4 palettes, and these are all of my Eternal Ink favorite colors. And then we have the Tattoo Smart Skin Tone palette, and then we have the Tattoo Smart Gray Values palette. If you don't have any of these on your iPad yet and you just want to figure out how to get to black, I suggest using the disc color selector and just using your Apple Pencil and quickly double tapping over on this side, and it will just automatically select black. Same thing works for white over here. So pure black, pure white. Now, another thing that we're offering, free giveaway with the link in the description, is this brush kit. I've shown you guys this brush kit a few times during this series, so you know what it's all about if you've been following along with the other videos. But in case you're new here, this brush set has some basic tools that I use every day, including these locked-in brush sizes. So we have the fine liner, small liner, mid liner, bold liner, fat liner, and heavy liner. Now, you can try to change the sizes of these all that you want, but these sizes are locked in. So every single time you pull out these brushes, they're going to be the exact same sizes relative to the resolution that you chose for your canvas. So assuming that I started with a 300 DPI canvas, then these lines would be the same size each time. But I'll just go in at the very beginning and just decide what the right line weight is going to be. That looks a little bit too heavy. We'll try the mid liner. That's more like it. Okay, so let me put my drawing glove on here. This isn't totally necessary, but it does help to keep your hand from sticking to the screen as much. And you can just buy these on Amazon. Digital art drawing glove. Right, so now this liner that I'm using, it has a decent amount of stabilization and streamline on it. If you're not familiar with those settings, let me show you. You can always take any brush that you have, even if it's a stock brush in Procreate, and you can swipe on it and duplicate it. Now you get a copy of it here. If you tap on that, come into the second setting here, it's called Stabilization. And you have 2 settings. One is called Streamline and one is called Stabilization. Normally, typically, these are going to be pretty much off or very low. I've found that I pretty much like 50% on both of those, but you may have a different preference. So if you find that you don't like how responsive these brushes are when you use them, try adjusting both of these and just going back and testing until you're happy with what you have. But typically speaking, I want a little bit of that streamline and I want a little bit of stabilization on my liner brushes. It takes away a little bit of the expression that you can achieve in your mark. Like it's not going to let you just kind of sketch wildly, and you may hate that. So just go with your own preference on this. But what I'm doing here is I'm going through and I'm just outlining the outside of each of the structures. With a slightly heavier line. And then I'm going to switch to a thinner line to mark these interior curves. I think I'll go with an even thinner line here because this is really just meant to be something that I'll put in with a gray line. If I want to get in here and make some edits, I'll just switch over to eraser, make it pretty small, maybe even smaller than that, and get in there and tune it up a little bit. So, I mean, this is pretty typical. I'm usually going to have a heavy line weight and a thin line weight in my designs, and sometimes I'll have an even heavier line weight. So whatever the choices are going to be, I do want to reflect those choices in the actual stencil that I'm creating, because it's helpful for me to make sure that I read the overall design more clearly, and I like to have that information in the stencil. This is where we ended up, and you can just see that I went ahead and filled in some solid black areas. I won't do that very often, but there were a few times where I felt like these solid black areas were small enough that I could go ahead and do that. And then of course there's also a whole section of wood here. Let me see if I can find the right layers. So this whole entire sketch for the wood was all done in a separate layer, and it's pretty much just painted on in values. And so I can quickly add color to it with overlay layers like we discussed in an earlier episode. Let me just kind of build this whole design so you can see where we're going to end up. Right, so there will be some yellowish glows kind of coming through these parts, but I haven't drawn them in yet. But this is the idea. Here's where we ended up, and now we just need to figure out how to do the lines for this type of surface. For this, I didn't really want to put lines in there. I really wanted to kind of use a combination of lines and this noise brush that I have. So let me show you what that looks like. There you can see the noise brush in action, and it's doing a really quick job. You know, working on a stencil like this, it might look like I had to make all of these little dots individually, but it's actually really fast. Let me show you how that works. So I will just turn off all of the mushrooms. Let me find them. Yeah, so we'll get them out of the way. And then just above the white layer that is currently acting as a layer of tracing paper, I'll add a new layer, rename it Wood Lines. Great, so I've got black selected. And just going back to the free RA brush kit here that you can get with the link in the description, and we have the noise shaders. So I have two options here. There's noise shader, and the way these work, if you use light pressure, you get these separated thin little dots. As you press harder, you get more and more noise until ultimately, most pressure you apply, it's almost a solid black area. But even if you stencil something like this, it's not as likely to have all this extra stencil purple go everywhere as it would be if you just filled the area with solid black. I don't know if any of you have ever tried stenciling a big area of solid black, but I find that it pretty quickly makes a mess of my stencil. And so I'd rather show a dark area like this than have it be completely solid. So you can decrease the size of the brush, and it gets pretty close to just being a dotted liner, like that. And there's also the bold option, so it's just a slightly bigger texture. Let's see which one we want to use today. I think we'll go with the regular noise shader. So yeah, we'll go with this one. So I'll just dial in the size that I want. And all I'm doing here is just sort of looking at what's dark in there and sketching in the darkness. So it's like a value study with a halftone. You can sort of outline things a little bit. Just kind of looking at what I see and thinking about what it would be like to actually tattoo over it quickly. And just in the first phase of actually tattooing this, I'm using a mag sometimes. I might be using a liner in like sort of a stipple setting where I'm just like, you know, the voltage is turned down way low, and I'm just kind of like moving really quickly to get those individual dots with the liner. Whatever technique works the best. Trying not to overdo how much information I put in here, but just trying to give myself enough to make sense of it when I'm actually there in the tattoo. Of course, I made this stuff up the first time, so I'm happy to make it up again. I'm just trying to get to something that's a nice map of what I'm doing here. So that's the process with the noise shader. And again, I might decide to come back in and establish some line work here and there. You can add that in later. It's coming out pretty bold. So I think this works well for any kind of realism stencil, and I hope you'll enjoy using it. So there's the completed lines for the wood. There's the completed lines for the shrooms. We have these white layers, turn them all the way up, and now we have a finished line drawing. That's how everything looks. Okay, so at this point, I just need to save an image that looks like this onto my camera roll. So I head up to the wrench, go to share, and share an image. You can go with JPEG. Now we know from before that the image that we did here is roughly 12 inches wide. So that's kind of a starting point for how wide we want to make all this stuff. And quite honestly, I actually will just wait until the client arrives and I have a flexible tape measure, and I will measure the exact length of their arm, length and width, because this next app that we're going to use is just really quick at turning whatever size line drawing we have into the size that we need it to be. Here's one thing to keep in mind. When you are doing something as big as a full sleeve or a back piece, it helps to be using a document that's close to that size, because if this whole drawing was just say 8 by 10 inches, that's way smaller than an actual sleeve would be. So I'd be scaling up this line art and basically reducing the resolution of it. So if I drew it too small to begin with and I tried to triple how big it was for a stencil, we'd see that the quality of the edges of the lines would get reduced. All the lines would be a little bit blurry. So it's good to start with a larger file if your iPad can handle. I might use something like a 17-inch tall file for a sleeve, and then I'm only scaling it up a little bit further. We've saved it into our camera gallery, and the app that I use is called Tattoo Print System by Geometrica. You can get this on the App Store for a few bucks, I imagine, and this is a really useful app, and it's designed entirely for this purpose. So the first thing you have to figure out is the image source. You can select the image from Save to your clipboard, from Files, or from Photos. We saved it in Photos. There it is. So there's the image, and we need to decide what the print size will be. So under print size, currently it says 45 inches by 70 inches. And we have the option if we want to measure it to the page or to the design or the drawing. I like to choose drawing. And we know that we're looking for something like 12. Let's see what that looks like. So at 12 inches wide for the drawing, the total height is 20.89. Now one of the things that I'm aware of with this drawing is I have this overlap area, and it's all meant to go underneath this part as it wraps around. And so even though we had a 12-inch section here, I'm thinking that I might have added a little bit extra weight. And so this is where, again, in the studio, before I actually print the stencil, I'm going to use a flexible tape measure and just actually measure the height of the arm and the wraparound width. And I would enter these settings in here. But just for the sake of keeping this tutorial short, let's assume that these are the right measurements. So the software, the app does all the work. Essentially what you need to do, you can look through the other settings. I think this is just saturation, brightness, and contrast. You have some other settings. You can mirror the image if you want to. If you want to add a grid on top of it, you can do that. I don't. That's an option. and then print destination is where you choose the printer, and then finally print. And once you pull up print, it does all the thinking and it figures out how many pages and what it's going to put on each page. And so it looks like currently we've got 4 pages here, and this is what each page will look like. If I were to press print right now, this would actually print out, and then I would just make 4 individual stencils and tape them all together so I have one giant stencil ready to add to my client's arm. I'm not going to hit print, so I'll hit cancel. So again, that's the Tattoo Print System app by Geometrica. I can highly recommend it, and I hope it helps you out. Okay, so now if you've watched every episode leading up to now, you have learned everything that I think is really important for any tattoo artist to know to be able to use Procreate really fast in the tattoo studio. If you don't mind, if this series brought you great value, please share it with friends and subscribe and be a part of our community here on Tattoo Smart. We really appreciate your attention. I thank you again for watching this, and I hope it brought you a lot of value. I hope that it's going to really speed up your workflow and leave you with a powerful toolbox that you can use every day for the rest of your career. My name is Russ Abbott. This is the Tattoo Smart Procreate Basics Series. Don't forget to check the link in the description to get the free brush set and color palettes that we're giving away. With that said, be on the lookout for our next tutorial series, which is coming really soon.